Welcome to your lecture. You should have already read this chapter by now. Let's get started. Here are your objectives for this lecture. They're the same objectives you have for this week's module. This week we are looking at the digestive system. The digestive system is responsible for breaking down the food we eat and absorbing the nutrients from that food. Both mechanical and chemical digestion takes place by smashing the food into smaller pieces for better digestion and then breaking down the chemical bonds of the various food products into simpler molecules. All the way from the mouth to the anus, the digestive system helps to absorb the nutrients and water that we need to survive. There are also accessory organs in addition to the alimentary canal that also contribute to the digestive process, as we will see. The organs of the digestive system consist of two basic groups: the organs of the alimentary canal and the accessory organs of the digestive system. The alimentary canal goes from the mouth all the way to the anus and is made up of a muscular tube used to both crush and move the food bolus along. It is about 8 meters or 26 and a quarter feet long when measured from end to end. The accessory organs help in the digestion process as the food makes its way through the alimentary canal. Some examples are the salivary glands, which produce enzymes, and saliva, the liver, which helps in bowel production as well as other useful tasks, and the pancreas, which also produces enzymes that aid in the digestive process. Don't worry about learning all this right away. We will look at each of these organs in more detail along with each segment of the alimentary canal. Now we'll look at the alimentary canal wall. Each segment of the canal has the same basic structure with variations as we will look at based upon the function of that segment. All portions have a mucosa as the innermost layer along with the body surface. Inside the inner surface, which contains mucous membrane and those goblet cells you love so much. This layer helps with absorption, so it must have a good surface area and it secretes many of the digestive enzymes we will discuss later. Remember, the body surface is not only the skin you see, but all the mucous membrane from the mouth to the lower lobes of the lung and from the mouth to the anus. Anywhere that the body comes in contact with the environment is considered part of the body's surface. Next, deeper into the body is the submucosa, which consists of a connective tissue, nourishes as it has a blood supply, and aids in absorption as well. Still deeper into the body is the muscularis layer that consists of smooth muscle, which helps in both segmentation and peristalsis of the food bolus. The smooth muscle layer has circular and longitudinal portions. Lastly is the serosa on the outside of the organ that is inside the abdomen. This layer also contains the visceral peritoneum you learned about in AP1. Here's a visualization of what we are talking about. First, we'll see the inside of the alimentary canal. This portion is the small bowel. Next, we can see a small biopsy and stain it and use a microscope to see better see the layers. On the body surface or the inner surface is the mucosa, then the submucosa is next and deeper, then muscularis, and finally the serosa on the outside of the organ within the abdomen. How is the alimentary canal controlled and regulated in general? Branches of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system extensively innervate the alimentary canal. Submucosal plexus controls secretions. Myenteric plexus controls gastrointestinal motility. Autonomic nervous system controls digestive activity. Remember, the autonomic nervous system is the automatic system, meaning it is not under voluntary control. This innervation is mostly through the vagus nerve or the sympathetic chain. Parasympathetic impulses increase activity of the digestive systems, like secretion and motility. This is because the parasympathetic nervous system is for homeostasis or everyday body function. Sympathetic impulses inhibit digestive actions like secretion and motility, and this is because the sympathetic nervous system is for fight or flight, to get us quickly out of a dangerous situation that may be life-threatening, and we do not have time to be digesting something. Enteroendocrine cells found in the stomach and small intestines secrete hormones to regulate GI organs and processes. The alimentary canal muscularis layer, which is smooth muscle and has two basic types of movement, either mixing or crushing movements like segmentation or propelling movements that move the food bolus along in one direction called peristalsis. The segmentation shown here is movement of the food bolus back and forth with alternating movements to crush and churn the food bolus. This gets the food down to small pieces to provide more surface area for digestion to occur. Peristalsis is a movement in one direction where the smooth muscle contracts behind the food bolus, squeezing it along in one direction while the area ahead of the bolus is relaxed, allowing it to move on forward down the tract. Let's look at each segment of the alimentary canal from most superior to inferior and look at accessory organs along the way. We'll start with the mouth. The mouth is used to ingest food along with mastication, which is the medical term for chewing. Saliva is added to the food bolus, which moistens the food and adds enzymes to help start the digestion process. It is surrounded by the lips, cheeks, tongue, and palate and includes the oral cavity and vestibule. The cheeks surround the mouth and provide the lateral walls and is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. The lips are very mobile and along with the cheeks aid in facial expressions. The tongue, shown here in more detail, aids in moving the food bolus and provides taste buds to taste the food. It is connected to the floor of the mouth by the lingual frenulum. The papillae are projections to help move the food bolus. Lingual tonsils contain lymphatic tissue. If you think of the mouth as a room, then the palate forms the roof of the mouth, while the cheeks being the walls on either side of you. The palate has a hard and soft portion. The hard palate contains bone, specifically that of the processes of the maxilla and palatine bones. The soft palate is just tissue and is made up of the muscular arch and ends at the uvula. The palatine tonsils are lymphatic tissue bilaterally. The pharyngeal tonsils are the larger masses of lymphatic tissue along the posterior wall. These two sets of tonsils are the ones that are removed during tonsillectomy. Next, we'll discuss the teeth. We need teeth for biting and chewing of food or mastication. We are omnivores which eat about anything and therefore need different types of teeth for this purpose. We have incisors that are used for biting and canine teeth that help in grasping and tearing of the food we eat. Molars and premolars grind up the food. Teeth are covered in a protective enamel and dentin makes up most of the tooth and surrounds the pulp cavity. Teeth are very important as those who lack teeth have a difficult time with nutrition. It is important to always take care of your teeth, like doctor teeth. The salivary glands produce saliva and enzymes to help in the chemical digestion of our food while the teeth are doing mechanical digestion. The parotid glands produce saliva and amylase. Amylase is an enzyme found in the saliva that breaks down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars. You can experience this for yourself if you take an unsalted cracker and place it in your mouth. After a while, you'll begin to taste a very sweet flavor, and this is the action of amylase breaking down the starches of the cracker into simple sugars. Submandibular and sublingual salivary glands produce more mucus like saliva. If this slide looks familiar, then it's because we saw it in the respiratory system lecture. Remember, the digestive and respiratory system share the mouth down to the epiglottis, as air also passes through this area along with food. Recall the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. As we swallow, the epiglottis covers the larynx, so the food bolus only enters the esophagus. The epiglottis protects our airway before the vocal cords. This flap prevents food or drink from going into the airway, as we have already seen in the respiratory system lecture. How does swallowing work? Have you ever thought about the steps it takes to swallow food or liquid? The first stage is voluntary as we place food in our mouths to chew and add saliva. This is both mechanical and chemical digestion, as we have already discussed, and forms our food bolus. Second stage occurs as the food bolus reaches the oropharynx and the swallowing reflex is stimulated. The soft palate and uvula rises to protect our nasal passages from food or liquid. Of course, this can fail if we laugh or cough at this stage. The hyoid bone and larynx elevate. The epiglottis then closes off the larynx to protect the trachea and the airway. The longitudinal muscles contract and inferior muscles relax while the esophagus opens. Peristalsis then occurs, forcing the food bolus into the esophagus. Then more peristalsis will occur as the food bolus makes its way into the stomach. The esophagus is a muscular tube that acts as a passageway for the food bolus. It penetrates the diaphragm to enter the abdominal cavity from the thoracic cavity. It contains mucous membranes and epithelial tissue that produce mucus to help ease the movement of the food bolus along with continued peristalsis. The cells can slough off if needed and are quickly replaced. It consists of both skeletal and smooth muscle. The cardiac sphincter must close after the food passes through or acid reflux can occur or the regurgitation of food. After the esophagus is the stomach, its purpose is to digest food we eat using acids and digestive enzymes. It is a J-shaped organ. It is normally below the diaphragm. It is located in the upper portion of the abdominal cavity toward the left side. The stomach contains rugae, which are folds that are mucosa and submucosa that allow it to distend if full. The food bolus is received by the stomach, and here we see something like segmentation occurring, mixing the food bolus, and this is an example of mechanical digestion. Chemical digestion from the stomach consists of acids and digestive enzymes helping to initiate the breakdown of proteins into amino acids. There is not much absorption here as this will occur in the small bowel. The cardia of the stomach is the region near the esophagus. The fundus is the round area that rises above the cardia. The body is the main portion of the stomach and is located between the fundus and pylorus. The pylorus is the most distal portion and closest to the small intestine and duodenum. The food bolus will then pass through the pyloric sphincter into the first segment of the small intestine called the duodenum with the help of circular smooth muscle. You may have asked yourself, what all does the stomach secrete anyway? If you have, then you are a very studious student preparing for that next exam, or you're just a very curious person. There are three types of secretory cells that make the gastric juice. The gastric juice consists of pepsinogen, an inactive form of pepsin, secreted by chief cells. Pepsin, which is the active enzyme that breaks down proteins if there is hydrochloric acid around. Gastric lipase, that catalyzes the breakdown of fats. Hydrochloric acid produced by parietal cells that activates pepsin from pepsinogen. Mucus secretion by our friends, the goblet cells, and this provides lubrication and protection of the stomach lining from all that acid. And lastly, intrinsic factor, which helps us absorb vitamin B12. If someone has a gastric bypass surgery or loses a large portion of their stomach, they may need vitamin B12 injections due to a loss of this intrinsic factor production. Here are the three phases of gastric secretion. The cephalic phase occurs at the sight, taste, smell, or even the thought of food. This can trigger the parasympathetic reflexes and cause gastric juice secretion. Next is the gastric phase as food enters the stomach and stimulates the release of gastrin, which in turn will result in the secretion of gastric juice. Finally, the intestinal phase, when the food bolus enters the small intestine, which results in the release of intestinal gastrin, which in turn causes more gastric juice release from the stomach. But this is brief, as is blocked by a cholecystokinin release causing a sympathetic response. Gastric secretion is under both neural and hormonal control. The sympathetic nervous system inhibits gastric secretion while the parasympathetic will increase gastric secretion. This is because the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight part of the autonomic or automatic nervous system, which is not under voluntary control, while the parasympathetic nervous system is about maintaining homeostasis, and digestion is part of that process. Hormonal control consists of somatostatin, which inhibits quadrichloric acid production, gastrin, which promotes gastric acid secretion, and cholecystokinin, or CCK, which will decrease gastric motility when fats and proteins enter the stomach for better digestion. The mixing of the food bolus with gastric juices becomes chyme as the digestion takes place. Small amounts of chyme are sent through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine, first segment called the duodenum. The lower esophageal sphincter should remain closed to prevent reflux of acid chyme back into the esophagus. When this fails, we get acid reflux. There's a mixing motion in the stomach that is like segmentation of the small intestine. Accessory organs like the pancreas secrete enzymes and acid-reducing bicarbonate into the small bowel as the chyme makes its way into the duodenum. The pancreas is one of the hardest working organs in our bodies as it serves two body systems. As you recall from AP1, it is part of the endocrine system producing glucagon and insulin controlling glucose metabolism, and therefore it is an endocrine gland. For the digestive system, it acts as an exocrine gland, secreting a product known down the duct and onto the body surface. Here it is secreting the pancreatic juice with amylase and lipase. Most of the pancreas is made of pancreatic axonar cells that release pancreatic juice. The pancreatic duct empties into the duodenum of the small intestine as seen here. The common bile duct and the pancreatic duct join together at the hepatopancreatic ampulla, also known as the ampulla of Vater. No, not that Vater. This one is spelled Vater. The pancreatic sphincter of Oddi surrounds the ampulla and controls the movement of bile into the duodenum. No, not that Oddi. This one is spelled Oddi. What is pancreatic juice? It contains enzymes for the digestion of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. We've already talked about pancreatic amylase. It is the same as the amylase of the salivary glands. This catalyzes the breakdown of starches and glycogen into disaccharides, which are simpler sugars. Many enzymes end in ACE or ASE and usually are named after the molecules they break down. Remember, enzymes catalyze reactions so they make them go faster. Pancreatic lipase catalyzes the breakdown of triglycerides, trypsin, which digests proteins, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase, which are activated by trypsin, both aid in protein digestion. Nucleases digest nucleic acids, and lastly, bicarbonate ions make up the juices more basic, make the juices more basic to deal with stomach acidity. Pancreatic digestive juices are regulated by secretin and CCK. Secretin stimulates the release of pancreatic juices that are mainly bicarbonates to neutralize stomach acids, and CCK stimulates more of the enzymes in the pancreatic juices. Parasympathetics will stimulate more digestive enzyme release from the pancreas. The liver is a vital organ that helps us eliminate waste and toxins from the body and helps immobilize glucose when we are lacking it. It's a very large reddish brown organ located in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen just under the diaphragm. It is very vascular and contains copious blood vessels. The liver, the largest lobe of the liver is the right lobe and the smaller is the left lobe. There are also two minor lobes of the liver, one near the gallbladder and the other near the inferior vena cava. The lobes consist of lobules, which are functional liver units. Hepatocytes are liver cells. Hepatic sinusoids are the channels of blood between the cells. The hepatic portal vein brings absorbed nutrients to sinusoids, while the hepatic artery brings oxygen-rich blood. The blood from the sinusoids will flow out to the central veins and the hepatic veins. Bile flows from the ductules to the hepatic ducts to the common hepatic duct. Here are those structures we just discussed in microscopic form and labeled for your viewing pleasure. The liver works very hard for us and has many important tasks in the human body. Here are just some of the important activities of the liver. I won't go over each one, but the most crucial are glycogen formation and breakdown, which helps us with the process of gluconeogenesis or the formation of glucose when we need it most. Can also come from non-carbohydrates. It removes amino group from amino acids and gets rid of the ammonia byproduct. It forms urea to aid in the removal of ammonia from the body. Helps with amino acid formation and some synthesis of vitamins. It destroys damaged red blood cells and deals with the waste products from this. It deals with the toxins like alcohol. It acts as a blood reservoir and it helps in fat digestion by making bile. Bile is made by the liver from the waste products of the breakdown of red blood cells along with cholesterols. It is used to digest fats in our digestive system. It is made of bilirubin and biliverdin and salts from cholesterol. If the common bile duct gets blocked by, say, a gallstone, we can have jaundice. Jaundice of the skin is the buildup of bilirubin in the tissues. Here's an example of jaundice. The gallbladder, as you have seen now in several slides, is a pear-shaped sac that contains bile. It releases bile into the cystic duct for the aid of the digestion of fats. The bile reaches the duodenum via the common bile duct. The bile then empties into the ampulla vator or the hepatopancreatic ampulla. The hepatopancreatic sphincter regulates this release of bile, and remember, it is also known as the sphincter of Oddi. Gallstones are mostly made of cholesterol and can cause pain and obstruction. Many have gallstones and never know it until one goes down the cystic duct and gets obstructed for a time, causing pain. Many patients elect to get their gallbladders removed only because they have stones present, which increases their risk of biliary colic, pancreatitis, cholecystitis in the future. CCK stimulates the gallbladder. There are gallstones shown here in this video. The small bowel consists of three sections: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The primary duty of the small intestine is the absorption of nutrients and material from the food we consume. The liver and pancreas have ducts that enter the duodenum to deposit their products there to aid in digestion. The bile from the liver helps in fat digestion, and enzymes from the pancreas aid in both fat and carbohydrate digestion. The small intestine is made up of three sections: the duodenum, which is the shortest section; jejunum, the middle portion, and is the thickest and more active; and the ileum is the third and longest segment of the three and contains lymph nodes. The mesentery contains blood vessels from the small intestine and is part of the peritoneum, which holds the small intestine to the abdominal wall. Another portion of the peritoneum drapes over the stomach and down over the small and large intestine and is known as the greater omentum. The villi and microvilli of the small bowel help aid in the absorption of nutrients as they provide additional surface area. These are extensions of the mucosa and submucosa. Do you recall the layers of the alimentary canal from earlier? Here you can see the mucosa and submucosa is more specialized. Look at the microvilli seen on this microscopic slide image. Let's review the enzymes we have met throughout the digestive system. This table is meant to help you study and retain these enzymes. It contains the name of the enzymes, where it is located, and what it does. In general, amylase catalyzes the breakdown of starches to disaccharides or simpler sugars. Lipase aids in breaking down fats into fatty acids and glycerol. Nucleases help break down nucleic acids into nucleotides. Peptidase helps in the breakdown of peptides into amino acids. Do you see the pattern here? Many enzymes end in ase and are usually named after the molecules they help break down. This should make studying them far easier once you see this. How is the small bowel regulated, you ask? Mucus secretion is stimulated by the presence of food bolus or chyme, along with mechanical stimulation in gastric juices, which are acidic. The secretion of mucus by the gallbladder cells help to protect the small bowel from these acidic and irritating secretions. Chyme will also elicit mucus production. The distension of the small bowel stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which, as you recall, is involved in regular body metabolism and homeostasis. So it will activate the digestive process, releasing the intestinal enzyme and causing peristalsis and segmentation, etc. How do we absorb what's in the chyme once it is broken down into simpler substances by the enzymes catalyzing various reactions? Monosaccharides, which are the simplest sugars, are absorbed by both facilitated diffusion and active transport. Recall passive versus active transport from AP1. Passive, like diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion, do not require ATP, while active transport does. Amino acids used to build proteins by the body will absorb by active transport. Fatty acids mostly are taken in by diffusion, while glycerol is absorbed by facilitated diffusion. Different electrolytes like potassium, sodium, calcium, and others are absorbed by both diffusion and active transport. Water is absorbed by osmosis, which should not be a surprise to you, as this is the diffusion of water. How is the chyme moved in the small bowel? This is done by peristalsis, we've already described to you. Segmentation also occurs here to further crush up the chyme for more surface area for absorption. Parasympathetic nerve impulses stimulate this process in both mixing and moving. If your small bowel becomes inflamed or if there's way too much chyme present, then this may cause diarrhea. This process is when chyme is rushed through the alimentary canal, not allowing for much water absorption. The ileocecal sphincter controls the movement of the chyme into the large intestine. Now, the large intestine. Is not nearly as long as the small intestine and is made up of the cecum or the blind pouch, which has the appendix, the ascending colon, transverse colon, the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and rectum, and finally the anus. The large intestine is mostly used for the absorption of water and the formation of the stool. It contains haustra, you can see here, which are the ridges. The cecum is like a pouch and is the beginning of the large bowel. It has a vermiform or worm-like appendix at the end, which is a dead end. It may function in the immune response, but the appendix gets frequently inflamed and infected and has to be removed during an episode of appendicitis. The colon consists of the ascending, transverse, and descending segments, with the very end having the sigmoid colon, rectum, and finally the anus. There are two sphincters that guard the anus to the outside of the body, the internal and external sphincters. Movement here is similar to what we saw in the small intestine, and the use of peristalsis will help initiate the process of defecation. You have all experienced the feeling of the need to defecate. There is the involuntary movement that causes the urge, and then the voluntary skeletal muscle contracted to initiate defecation. Both the internal and external anal sphincters must relax for the stool to pass. This ends the lecture. You may need to take a break about now.